We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
Looks like the rain has gone.
Welcome to part 2 of my conversation with Emiliano Diaz de Leon. We're covering some pretty heavy topic matter here, but listen out for where Emiliano shares his hope for the future and the progress that we as a society are having as we begin to normalize conversations around sexual violence. Enjoy. Man, there's so many facets to this. I came in with 6 questions. Now I've got 60.
That's good.
I want to talk to you about the offender, the perpetrator. I didn't, I've this, and in no way are we trying to absolve anyone from their acts or their crimes, or I can't speak for us. Let me say me. But I always grew up learning about Charles Manson going, well, that dude was a psychopath, right? He committed some horrible acts. And when I found out about his childhood, I went, no wonder he committed what he went through horrible things and in turn did 10 times worse. But if there is a way to measure, what's your stance? What are your thoughts around redemption for the offender, the perpetrator? Like, is it just not an option, lock them up, throw away the key? You've played your cards wrong in this life? Or have you seen men, women, any perpetrator actually redeemed to turn things around?
It's a great question. And this is hard, right? Because I think like I said earlier, while our focus is on the victim and survivor, the first step for offenders, right? If we want to call them offenders, perpetrators, or we want to label those individuals that commit these acts, the first step is accountability, right?
Yes.
Them holding themselves accountable, and the community holding them accountable, right? That there's some form of restorative justice that happens, right? That are not connected to the criminal justice system, especially because we know that system, unfortunately, the way that the laws are designed tend to allow offenders and perpetrators to walk away without conviction. And so they may get charged, they may get arrested and spend some time in jail, but they eventually come back out into our communities. And unfortunately, they tend to reoffend. And so what is needed is really intensive mental health care to undo their own trauma, right? To undo their own trauma and to be able to provide them with the skills, right? To be able to manage their relationships, their behavior healthy and non-violently, right? But that's not the case, right? Like that's like for most of us who are watching, there are no systems of accountability that for offenders, and most of them get away with it and they continue to abuse, and unfortunately, by the time that they are caught, it's maybe after 2 or 3 times. So there can be redemption, especially for young people who are engaging in this behavior. The research has shown that it's much more effective if there's early intervention for young people who have engaged in some sexually abusive behavior. There tends to be more transformation and more change of behavior. So we're finding that to be really effective. But for adult men, that isn't always the case, in terms of if there are no systems of accountability in that community, in that place of worship, in that workplace, then that individual just then goes on to reoffend. Now, do I believe that offenders can change? Yes. Do most offenders want to change? Um, from my experience of working with offenders and perpetrators, it's they're just not they're not invested in the same way that I would like them to be. And it is possible. There are individuals who have offended who have gone on to be successful, right? I mean, I think the reality that we talked about earlier is that there are plenty of offenders around us that are never, again, they're never reported and they're never
Yeah.
held accountable, and they go on
Sure.
to they go on to abuse.
Yeah.
And so it's really difficult to say,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well done in doing your best to answer that one too, because I ask it merely as it is a difficult question. I mean,
It is.
is it a question, or is it just like more like just stating something that's a challenge or a problem? And I know time is short, and I'm really grateful for you bringing the big guns of your experience to the table. So forgive me if this question is out of scope, because I know you've mentioned a couple times that you primarily work with victims, right, on the healing path. But have you seen cases or worked with cases of men, boys that have been actually wrongly accused and that have been caught up in the system of condemnation? And have you seen examples of that? And do you have any thoughts around how we can support people like that who have been wrongly accused? Because I speak to people all the time who have people in their lives who have been accused of such things, and whether it's true or not, I don't know.
Yeah,
But it comes as such a shock to them that person would be branded with this.
yeah.
So curious of your thoughts.
That's a great question. Um, I think the the most important thing that we can do as friends or family members of that individual is to trust our gut, like our gut feeling, our instincts about that individual, right? And whether what they're saying or what the victim is saying is true, right? Because like I said earlier, it's so difficult to prove sexual violence because most of the time that act of violence happens behind closed doors. The offender ensures is grooming the individual. It's also ensuring that there's no witnesses. They're enforcing a code of silence with the victim, and so we don't. Again, it's extremely difficult to prove in a court of law because of the requirements around evidence. And so we are then put in a position where we have to either we have to believe the survivor and believe the offender. And especially when they're saying that they didn't engage in that abusive behavior. So we have to make, like, ultimately it is a decision of family members and friends to make that determination, because again, it's so difficult to prove, especially um, if there's no evidence collected or it's gone through the criminal justice system to prove in a court of law that the offender engaged in that abusive behavior. So that's why I always begin by believing, right? I'm going to begin by believing the survivor. And I'm going to have to ultimately going to have to choose whether I believe the offender or the perpetrator. But the research shows that most reports of violence and abuse are valid from the victim, right? There's
Yeah.
very little to none
Yeah.
false reporting in this area, and so I think that's the real, it's difficult for us to believe that individual who we know, that we love and that we respect would engage in that kind of behavior. It's extremely difficult. That is
Yeah.
like I've experienced that myself in terms of mentors, um, family members, colleagues, friends. I've had my share of experiences of people in my life who have engaged in behavior, and then they said, "Oh no, I didn't do it." But it's really, again, I have to decide for myself whether I want to believe them. And because there's no proof. I have to just really trust my instinct, and my instinct. I will tell folks like The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker is so important when we talk about sexual violence, and understanding and protecting ourselves from offenders. Right? He wrote a fantastic book called Protecting the Gift that I recommend to all the parents who are watching, because it really helps us understand that ultimately that person that we have a feeling about, we need to trust that feeling, for all the reasons that I said, because this is so difficult to prove one way or another. And of course, we need to do more work to strengthen laws that protect victims and survivors and hold offenders accountable. Right? There's still a lot of work, even here in Texas, that we're engaged in right now in the legislative session. But just nationally, it's really a mixed bag of laws and around offender programs, or holding offenders accountable, or registering sex offenders. So, you know, it's really difficult to say, but I would leave it to the individual to decide, right, for themselves.
And I think we need to get clear on the conversation of like black and white, like what is right, what is wrong. I love that you're talking to your son about touch, teaching about what's appropriate, what isn't. I think there's a lot of fear right now for men that these things that they may have been doing for a long time, that in their deepest hearts, like really like on a soul level, they would have never thought to have a negative impact on someone.
Mm.
That these habits, behaviors, all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, they're nice now. There's been this big shift in consciousness around the world around what's right, what's wrong. And I think it sounds like there's a gap between what's societally accepted as right and wrong and habitual behaviors, right? Even on the smallest level. So I think there's a lot of men right now that are really terrified that the pitchforks and are going to come for them. So
Oh,
I judge this to be like a messy, there's no real linear, straightforward approach to this, right? Other than just continuing to have the conversation. But I did see a physical change in you just now. I want to get your thoughts on that.
no, that's real. I don't like. I want to invite men into this conversation, right?
Mm,
Um, we have to have conversations about consent.
mm,
Nobody, especially as adult men, nobody, because of the Act Like a Man box that you were referring to earlier from Paul Kivel and
yeah,
Tony Porter. I think when you think about how we enforce that, right, and these ideas about masculinity, one of the things that we're not taught is about just like what does healthy sexual behavior look like, right? That's why
yes,
it's so critical
yes,
for me to, because nobody had those conversations with me when I was a boy.
mhm,
There was never, my mother was not comfortable having those conversations with me, being
sure,
a child of being raised by a single parent. So
yeah,
she never had those conversations with me. The men in my life never had the conversations with me. And so I ended up learning on my own, right, from my peers and from,
yeah,
magazines, from
mm,
porn. I got all these ideas about what was appropriate, and they weren't healthy.
mm,
They weren't healthy ideas of sex and sexuality.
yeah,
And so I engaged. I think one of the things that's really important for folks to understand is that we have to be reflective and think about, okay, these ideas, I got them from all of these places, from music, from
yeah,
movies, from television,
yeah,
about engaging in sex, right? In
mm,
the role that we as men have in the act of sex, right? In the expectation of sex, and we're not talking to each other about that. And when we're talking, we're boasting, and we're like,
yeah,
yeah, I hit that, and
yeah. I got to second base. Like, dude, you
yeah,
didn't get to home
that's
base.
right.
Like, come on,
Well,
man.
we're engaging in these conversations where it's
Yeah,
again about winning, about conquering, around hitting, hitting that, like all of those things that I'm guilty of,
guilty. Right here, sir.
guilty
Yeah,
of engaging in that kind of language and that kind of
mm,
behavior,
yeah,
until I began to just be reflective and to
mm,
learn right? From the women that I was dating, um, about what was appropriate, right? I was learning from them in terms of what was acceptable,
Yes.
what did consent look like for them,
Yeah.
what kind of behavior were they comfortable in engaging in, and so it's an ongoing conversation, regardless of whether it's a we're dating somebody and we're engaging in a sexual act with them. There needs to be consent. We just need to be able to have that conversation as
Yeah.
men. We need to ask for consent and we need to receive consent as well. So this is consent is not just a one-way street. It's not something where men, you guys need to go ask for consent. It's about making sure that you're engaging in a conversation about what is appropriate and what we're comfortable with, and how far are we going to take this sexual behavior. And that's why, again, as parents, especially of boys, it's important to have those conversations about body autonomy, what is appropriate and what is not okay. I'll give you an example. My son just started school in person. He's been going to school, sixth grade, virtually from home for the last year. So this week he just went back to school, and there was a classmate that was getting into his physical space, that was touching his laptop, that was trying to get into his backpack, right? And because of COVID, they have to be separate, right? But this classmate was getting in his space, and it made him very uncomfortable. And he had to articulate multiple times to his classmate that he was uncomfortable with them getting into his space because of COVID, primarily because of COVID, and because it wasn't okay. The student was touching their stuff without their permission. And that's just a real world example of how important it is for us to teach our children, to teach young men and men the language of both giving and receiving consent, right? Like of having honest conversations with each other about what is healthy sex look like, right? What kind of behavior do I want to engage in? And it's about communication, right? And unfortunately, because of the Act Like a Man box, one of the things that we're not giving it are those tools. They're not readily available to us as boys. We're not conditioned or trained to communicate, to use words.
Nor is it readily modeled.
Exactly, and so that's why it's so important for my son for us to engage in these conversations and to have honest conversations and open conversations. And as he's experiencing puberty, like this has been one of the most difficult conversations for me as a parent and as a man, because nobody had that conversation with me. Like I was figuring things out on my own, and we had, he loves books, and so we gave him a book about puberty, and we said, like, if you want to come and talk to us about it, you have questions from the book.
Yeah.
Read the whole book in one sitting, but wasn't comfortable. Like he didn't have questions. We're like, okay, well, if you have questions, whenever you have questions about anything you just read, or you want information, you want more information, let us know. Nobody did that with me. Nobody had that conversation with me.
Yeah.
So that's how transformative our relationships and our the power that we have as men to model like healthy sexuality, right? There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with engaging in behavior that is consensual, right? Like we have to seek consent for ourselves, like and I think that's really important, that it is for us as men to understand that it is a two-way street, and we don't have the language yet. We're still figuring it out. We're gonna make mistakes. But
work in progress.
We're a work in progress when it comes to this issue.
Yeah.
We have a lot to learn, and there are a lot of examples of what not to say or do, and we have to pay attention to that. But the reality is, there's a lot of boys and men who are engaged in healthy relationships and healthy sexual behavior, and those are the guys that I want to watch and to learn from, and I want to, because I want to have enjoyable, pleasurable, healthy sex. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing, I think it's important.
I think we can all. I think we
all agree with that. So, and I want that for all the girls and women in my life now. And I think that's so important, just to be able to engage in those conversations through throughout our life, right? And so that we don't feel like the onus is on us.
Thank you for saying that. I think you just touched on something that is a very, um, a conversation that when people talk about the power of men, right?
Mhm.
Um, that I don't think often enough that we speak it to the fact that men are expected to be the first to bring up a lot of things around dating, sex, many other things. Like it's societally expected that men pick up the tab and pick up the bill, that men go for the first kiss, right? That are the first to ask for consent. And I think if we can take some of that, societally, take some of that pressure off of men, that there are these big high stake moments when you're courting someone, dating someone, to be like, well, no, let's open it up to both parties, right? To communicate what that consent looks like. So it's not this big, oh, did he make it to second base? Well, no, did she? Right? Did they
Mhm.
get there together? Not just it all being on the man. So thank you for
Yeah.
speaking to that.
No, I appreciate you saying that. I think my experience with my partner, right, who I've been married to for oh, 19 years, I think.
Mm.
I mean, if I'm wrong, I'm in so much trouble. But we've been married for a long time, and before that, we were dating for a long time, right?
Mm.
And so nobody talked to me about this, right? Like nobody, but I wanted to be in a healthy relationship, and this was like the first healthy relationship that I had ever been in
Yeah.
as a young man when I met my partner.
Mm.
And she was aware of my experiences of violence and abuse. She was aware of, even if folks look at my own personal story, I engaged in abusive behavior as a teenager in my early teen relationships. All of that sort of informs my ideas and how critical it is for me to engage in, like, or when I entered this relationship, to have conversations early with my partner about the expectations, about what was expected, because those cultural, not just the societal expectations, but there were cultural expectations on top of that, right? And that's true for people regardless of their identity or their sexual orientation, or there are these forces. Um, and one of the things that was an important lesson for me is just to be willing to be vulnerable, right? And to engage in hard conversations, and uh, to be held accountable, to allow myself to be held accountable when I made mistakes, um, and to communicate ongoing to this day, that we're constantly communicating with each other what our needs and our desires are, right? Um,
Absolutely.
so that's true for folks who are in partnerships, folks who are dating, folks who just want to engage in sex. Like,
Mm.
consent is critical. Like, just engaging in a conversation about what you want and what you want to do, and what's pleasurable, and what you
Yeah.
need from your partner. um I can't tell you, I really wish that there was a man in my life that had, or woman in my life that had come to have that conversation with me at an early age. There
Yeah.
wouldn't I wouldn't have made as many mistakes as I did, and I wouldn't um
Mm.
I would have had better information about my sexual health,
Yeah.
right? And I think it's, again, because of those forces,
Mhm.
um, because it's so, like, it's taboo. Oh, this is making me really uncomfortable, right? My son is really uncomfortable. Like, even right now, he's really uncomfortable with the idea of talking about puberty. It makes him really uncomfortable. Well, that's natural. That's natural for boys, and for girls as well at that age, to talk openly and honestly, because, again, it's not part of our
Yeah.
culture. It's not something we're learning
Mhm.
at school. It's not something,
Yeah.
we easily have access to. We're
Yeah.
not, we don't have information. And so for us, it was critical to have those conversations, and hopefully
Yeah.
he will continue to come to me with questions and with, his
Yeah.
experiences. And
I love that. What you did
yeah.
is you opened the door to him. You made it possible, whether he does or he doesn't, he
Mhm.
knows it's an option. Here's a challenge for all those listening out there. I initially was going to say here's a challenge for all the blokes out there, but no, here's a challenge for everyone. And I did this for the first time when I first started dating my partner Christine, and I've never done it before. But you know, we'd been on a couple dates, and I asked her, I said, "Can I kiss you?" And it took her by surprise. Like she'd never heard that question before. I had never said that question before, asked that question before. Um, but she told me after the fact, she said, if you would have leant in and kissed me, I would have rejected it. But the fact that you asked me, it gave her a chance to go, well, yeah, I would like that. Not to say that I'm the model of the model of the change that's needed. All I'm saying is it worked for me, and it was a great confidence booster, I think, in our early stages of dating that we established right from the get go. Like, hey, guess what? You know what? You can pick up the tab next time, love.
And you know what, that is changing, right? When we watch
Yeah.
romantic comedies, when we watch films, and when we watch shows, we're seeing the shift in our culture, right? Around some of these expectations on the part of men and the part of women, and the like folks, we're seeing different ideas of relationships, right? And I think those models, those examples are so important to have, and to be able to talk about. Those are all learning moments when for us as adult men, even with our boys in our lives, to be able to talk about the things that they're consuming within the culture, right? That whether it's ideas that are reinforcing these problematic behaviors, or they're ideas of these things that are outside of the norm, right? That we're trying to get to a different place of being, right? Like
Yeah.
my son is a very different boy just right now as an 11-year-old boy than I was. So I can only imagine the kind of boy, like the kind of man he's going to be, right? So just imagine in one generation, ended violence, ended abuse, and have transformed the like masculinity in such a significant way that 11-year-old boy is like so far like of where I am now as an adult man, right? So I think that's important for us to understand, that that's the power of our relationships and our ability to model what this sort of new masculinity can look like, right? Like I want to embody that. I want to like I'm a sponge, right? Like I want to absorb, and I want to learn, and I want to read things, and I want to engage in conversations with him, so that because he has access to information that I didn't when I was his age. And so
You're helping him look beyond the boundaries that are the live like a man box,
yeah,
right? The act like a man box. There are no boundaries or borders here
yeah.
to him, right? You're making it endless, the
We're
possibilities.
breaking the box, right? We talked here at TASA, we did a campaign called Break the Box. And
Break the box.
and so that's what we're doing. Like we're just literally engaging in breaking that box, those traditional ideas that we have about masculinity, and like creating something new, something beautiful, something wonderful, something healthy, something something different. And I think that's what, to me, is what is so exciting about this conversation. It's just like you said earlier, like opening a door for my son. This is opening a door and giving men and women permission to have a conversation. The folks who are listening, I want you to talk to I want you to share this podcast with them, and I want you to just have a conversation over your kitchen table, like while you're walking with your partner, while you're hanging out with your kid. Like that is how we change the culture, right? Like that's how we transform our society, so that these expectations that you were talking about just begin to disappear. And we have a whole new way of, and I understand the resistance. Like I understand it completely. There are going to be men and women who are listening to this who are resistant to the idea of change, right?
But we can do our part by, rather than point our fingers at them and call them wrong, extend our hands and hold theirs. To support them, to look at a potential new way of looking at it.
Absolutely. I think that's why dialogue and conversation
Yeah.
is so critical, right? Because these ideas are really entrenched in our society,
Mm.
and they ultimately take a long time for us to unpack, right,
Yeah.
and to look at, and
Yeah.
it's painful and it's difficult, but it can also be joyful. It can be exciting. Like, again, the unpacking is important for us to do together. Um, and for us to do with other men, right? So one of the things that we're doing here in Texas is we have a monthly virtual gathering for male identified folks that want to do the work. So folks who are engaged in the work as prevention educators or victim advocates, or who are new to the work, who want to learn more, that want to engage the boys and men in their communities around healthy, about these ideas around healthy masculinity. And so it's called Texas Men Speak. And so we get together every fourth Thursday of the month for 1 hour. So any male identified person here in Texas is invited into that space to engage in these critical conversations with each other, right? And it's important that we have the language and the skills then to be able to go and engage in those conversations with the girls and women in our lives, right? With our family members and our friends and our coworkers and our classmates
Yeah.
and our, the people that we worship with, right?
Mm.
That's that's where change happens, right?
Yeah.
If we can begin at the individual level, then eventually we believe that that'll change our society.
Yeah.
And we have to start
Absolutely.
somewhere. And so I'm happy to start
Mm.
this conversation with you, and I hope that folks will continue this
Yeah.
conversation, um, online.
Yeah, you never know the
Yeah,
ripple, right? You never know the ripple effect that conversations like this can have. And, naively before we hit record and went live, uh, I said, "Hey, let's try and keep this to 30 to 40 minutes," not giving enough credence and credit to to the how big this
it is.
topic is. But I'm so grateful that we've been able to round it out on a really high note, a
Absolutely.
really positive
Yeah.
level. So, mate, one question for you before I ask you to tell us more about how we can get involved in your work. And that is, what is giving you the most excitement and hope around your work?
Well, I will tell you, here at TASA, we just launched a YouTube playlist of these 10 individual stories of male identified folks talking about exploring these issues related to masculinity, including childhood sexual abuse. My friend and colleague Michael Gwynn shares his story through spoken word about his own experiences, uh, where he's disclosing this now as an adult man, right? He's a social worker, and he's finally disclosed his experiences of sexual abuse in an amazing piece that's available now on our YouTube channel. So folks just search TASA, TAASA on YouTube, they'll find that playlist. I'm super excited about that. Those stories being it's from a project that we did with this group of men last year. And I'm excited that they're now in the world, that people can watch them and share them, and ultimately continue the conversations that we're having here, right? And use them to engage in critical conversations with the boys and men and women in our lives. um, and I'm really excited about the potential, the impact that you said, the ripple effect of those individual stories, the story of Michael Gwynn, especially this month for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, the kind of that other men, especially men of color, will see and hear his story, and will disclose, will come forward, will begin the healing process from their experiences of sexual abuse.
Beautiful, mate. Beautiful. Well, mate, how can we find out more about your work outside of going to YouTube and listening to those stories?
Yeah. Well, before I talk about myself, I do want to encourage folks who are listening that need support to reach out to like we talked about, to their local rape crisis
Mm.
center. There's also a national sexual assault hotline. It's 1-800-656-4673. You can also Google them, and they have a text chat. So if you're in crisis, if you felt triggered, if you need to talk to somebody
Mhm.
about your own experiences of sexual violence, I encourage you to reach out to the national hotline. They will connect you to your local rape crisis center. So that's important, and it's both available in English as well as Spanish. And folks who you like, it's accessible to everyone. So It's an important service. I would encourage male survivors that have had some experience of childhood sexual abuse to reach out to 1 in 6, malesurvivor.org, Men Healing. These are all like these, when we think about supporting and helping as a loved one, as a friend, a family member, coworker, etc. These are the resources that we should share with that boy or man in our life. So I definitely encourage folks to reach out to those services if they need support. And then people can find me here at TASA. Definitely follow us on social media. We're on every social media platform, so definitely follow us at TASA. Folks can email me at diazdeleon@tasa.org. And but I would encourage folks who are listening to follow me on Twitter. If you're interested in learning more about this issue or issues related to masculinity or violence prevention, to definitely follow me on Twitter. That's sort of the place where I share, my thoughts, upcoming conferences, research, training opportunities, etc. So definitely encourage folks to look for me on Twitter. So those are the two primarily places people can find me.
Well, mate, I'm going to get you to email those through to me, all those resources, and I'll make sure that they're in the show notes, not only in this video, but also in the show notes for the podcast when this goes live there. Well, mate, I'm going to have to write a well thought out email or give a phone call to Jeff Pereira to thank him for the introduction to you, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor for me to share this space with you. Clearly, this is something that you've committed a humongous portion of your life to, and the ripple effect of that, the knock-on effect of that, while they may not be able to be quantified, I can just tell that it's huge.
Yeah, I will tell folks this is my life's work, and as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this particular issue. But yeah, my gratitude to Jeff, and I think a lot of what your conversation with him and Jeff's work continues to inform my thinking about this issue, and so I really appreciate the invitation to be a part of this conversation with you, Brendan. And it's been a pleasure, and I've learned so much just in the conversation. And I appreciate your questions because I know that folks who are listening or watching have the same questions or come into this conversation with the same questions. And I think it's so important that we look for the answers and that we get the answers from solid sources.
Couldn't agree more, mate. Couldn't agree more. Well, have to give a huge thank you to those of you that have joined us live today. I see we've had over 2,000 of you, which is great. And we've got, comments left and right. I see men sharing vulnerable posts about their experiences. I see women checking in and sharing their thoughts, and a lot of people that are just jumping in and sharing some beautiful stuff with us. So I appreciate your contribution to all of you that have joined us live today. It does not go unnoticed.
Thank you to the folks who have been sharing. Yeah, I mean, we appreciate that, I think, and I look forward to engaging you in the comments as well. So I definitely plan on doing that.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, guys, that has been another episode and live recording of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove that there's more than just one way to be a man. Thank you to all of you out there. Thank you for your check-in. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your continued support. And we're just a month into this wild journey. We're loving it. We're going to keep it rocking, keep it rolling. And I wish you guys a very blessed week. Lots of love.
Thank you, Brandon. Bye, everybody.
Well, there you have it. Another courageous conversation with an incredible guest. Thank you so much, Emiliano, for the incredible work that you're doing, mate. Just phenomenal to see that there are human beings out there that are, that are really standing up and being champions for those that have been impacted in such horrific ways in their lives. Things that people never will have asked for in their lives. So great to know that there are human beings out there that are willing to make a difference and opening up invitations for us, people like you and me, to become champions for those that have been impacted by sexual violence as well. Of course, be sure that if you have been impacted either personally or someone in your life has been impacted, to know the resources that are available for those out there. Places like the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, NSVRC. You can go to www.nsvrc.org, as well as your local Rape Crisis Center. Look at www.partnershipfca.com. And of course, let's mention RAIN, the incredible organization, Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. And you can find that at centers, CENTERS.RAIN, that's NNRAINN.org. Hey, before we let you go, we just want to let you know that we've been getting some incredible feedback and response for episode 13 of the podcast, Looking Beyond Men and Masculinity with Alex Gabby, where we spoke about his film of the same name, Beyond Men and Masculinity. Now, we mentioned in the episode that there are going to be virtual screenings as well as live Q&As with people that were featured in the documentary, and that's going to be on April 15th and May 6th. You still have a chance to get tickets, although they are being swept up. You can find the links to those in the show notes, but in the meantime, here is an audio clip from the documentary. Enjoy.
Being a boy comes with a certain set of rules. How do you be one of the boys?
Crying was very looked down upon.
And your father was?
My father was front and center with that, yes.
They have all these feelings and there's nowhere for these feelings to go. They know it's considered a feminine weakness.
Boys work very, very hard to achieve a masculine identity. But that identity can be taken from them.
Patriarchy is a deviously clever system.
Men learn to escape by moving from shame to grandiosity. We teach them to disconnect from their feelings. We teach them to disconnect from vulnerability.
Vulnerability is a missing link that men need to be truly powerful.
To be a man means to be in the superior position. So any move toward democracy, which is toward equality, becomes a threat to manhood. And if manhood is threatened, violence is imminent. There's a puzzle that we have to figure out.
What's happening right now is an opportunity for men to be human.
To be completely trusted and vulnerable and not be judged is what helps me to becoming this new human being.
Kindness and caring and loving, and how about those be alpha traits?
We're trying to figure out how to be fully ourselves and fully connected at the same time. It's the only thing that will really make us happy.
We're really disrupting some core foundational elements upon which our society is built, and that feels dangerous.
This has been the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. I have been your host, Brandon Clift, and I personally want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. And of course, I want to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you make it a heck of a lot easier for us to let men out there in the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. Special thanks, of course, goes to my incredible team, Marketing and Communications Director Boyson Hodgson, producer and editor of this episode, Michael Russo, who makes me sound so much more intelligent than I actually am, so of course, special kudos goes there. And if you've been enjoying the music throughout this episode and all of our episodes, check out Jim, Donovan, and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. Now, the fee for this episode is simple. If you found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, remember that life doesn't happen to us, it happens for us, so long as we rip the pen out of fate's hand and become the author of our own story. So my friend, pick up the pen and we'll see you next week. Lots of love.